Hello everyone, it's been a long time since I posted on this channel, but today seemed like a good day to get it back up and running again because it is February 28th, 2026, and around 2 a.m. this morning, the president announced yet another regime change war with Iran by the US and Israel. I thought since now we are right in the 2026 midterms and 2 years away from the 2028 presidential election with candidates already gearing themselves up as potential candidates, it's important to look at and investigate and talk openly about how candidates currently, within the first 12 hours of this war, have been responding, what their statements look like, if they've responded at all, because we've seen a lot of different statements from potential candidates and party leaders, some good, some bad, and we know from history again and again and again that a year from now, 2 years from now, when these candidates are fully in the presidential election cycle, they might change their words, they might reassess how the public viewed this war, but we've already seen in the last 12 hours a lot of indications of how these candidates value foreign policy, whether or not they're willing to critique the military-industrial complex or Israel, and exactly who is showing signs of moral clarity and leadership, some who surprise me and might surprise you. So a tier list seems a little silly for this serious topic, but with all the different statements coming out, I do think it's a good way to cut through the noise and actually visualize where candidates stand in terms of regime change war. And if you haven't seen a tier list before, it's just a ranking system where S means the top rank you could get, and if the image of the person is closest to the letter, that means it's a high A. If it's farther away, that means it's a low A, closer to a B. So just 3 quick caveats before we start. The first one is that a politician could make a statement that sounds good and then their actions do something completely different. So I'll do my best to really analyze the statement for what it is based on if they're opposing the war, how hard they're opposing it, and the reasons they're giving. Are they just saying it's a procedural issue they have, that they didn't come to Congress first? Or are they actually showing moral clarity? The second caveat is, again, this ranking is based on the response to the regime change war. It's not based on whether or not they'll make a good candidate in the 2028 election. And the final caveat is that the title probably says 2028 presidential candidates. The vast majority of these are probably going to run for president in 2028. Some of them might not. But I also included a couple of people who can't run, like Zoran Mandami, that are still important to hear from because of their impact and role in the party right now, as well as the 2 lead Democratic Senate candidates in Maine, and the 2 Democratic Senate candidates in Texas, because I think it's also important to hear what they say in early voting for the primaries. There are 28 of them, but a lot of them have stayed silent and haven't released a statement, in which case they will go in the F tier along with people who are vocally supporting the war. Of course, we're not going to look at any statements by J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio because they serve at high levels of this administration who are actively involved in the regime change war, so they would obviously go in the F tier. So without any more delay, we'll just jump right in with Gavin Newsom, who is the governor of California, and he leads most of the early 2028 polls to be the Democratic nominee for president. His statement reads as follows: "The corrupt and regressive Iranian regime must never have nuclear weapons. The leadership of Iran must go. But that does not justify the President of the United States engaging in an illegal, dangerous war that will risk the lives of our American service members and our friends without justification to the American people. President Trump is putting Americans at risk abroad because he is unpopular at home." So as we go through these, you'll probably get a sense of what I consider to be a good statement and a bad statement. And the issue with Gavin Newsom's funny because for many years people have thought that he is a super skilled politician who loves the game and really knows how to figure out where the base is, work with it, and elevate himself into power. But the last 2 years, he's really been fumbling on a lot of extremely important issues to the base and to the American public in general. And the thing that stops this response from being a good response to regime change war is how he immediately leads saying the leadership in Iran must go, which is, in a sense, regime change. So his statement starts with the warmongering and then transitions to how he condemns the war for being illegal, which basically means it didn't get approval from Congress. And Gavin Newsom isn't saying he opposes regime change wars because they almost always make things worse. He isn't condemning how we seem to be putting American lives on the line on behalf of Israel's political ambitions, which is why I put Gavin Newsom's response at a D. Next, we have Kamala Harris. Her response was a little long, so I will read quickly through it. She says, "Donald Trump is dragging the United States into a war the American people do not want. Let me be clear. I am opposed to a regime change war in Iran, and our troops are being put in harm's way for the sake of Trump's war of choice. This is a dangerous and unnecessary gamble with American lives that also jeopardizes stability in the region and our standing in the world. What we are witnessing is not strength. It is recklessness dressed up as resolve. I know the threat that Iran poses, and they must never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, but this is not the way to dismantle that threat. During the campaign, Donald Trump promised to end wars rather than start them. It was a lie. Then last year he said we obliterated Iran's nuclear program. That too was a lie. And let us be clear-eyed about what comes next. The president was already said this conflict may produce American casualties. Doug and I will be praying for all of our brave servicemen and women, who we know are undertaking dangerous missions with exceptional skill, discipline, and precision. Our troops deserve a commander-in-chief who approaches decisions on matters of war and peace with the same steadiness and discipline our troops show every day. Under the Constitution of the United States, the president must receive authorization from Congress to enter a war. But even if he had, that does not change the fact that the action is unwise, unjustified, and not supported by the American people. There could be no equivocation in our opposition to Donald Trump's war of choice, and Congress must use all available power to prevent him from further committing us to this conflict. Our troops, our allies, and the American people deserve nothing less. So to tell you the truth, I was very surprised by that statement. It is extremely morally clear. It doesn't narrow down her opposition to something procedural. It's instead very clear about how this war is unjust and also a bad strategy. Surprisingly, I was actually going to put it at an A, but I was sort of disappointed that it was held back by what sounded like campaigning for 2028. Her saying the U.S. deserves a president who XYZ. It kind of sounds like she's already in campaign mode, and I think that weakens the statement and her argument to sounding more like strategic electoral politics rather than moral clarity and leadership. And another dumb thing that didn't really weigh on this, but I just thought I'd mention, is lines like "what we are witnessing is not strength, it is recklessness dressed up as resolved." That sort of antithesis language is very common with ChatGPT and AI models. And to me, some of these lines just felt a little generated by artificial intelligence. And it's possible that she wrote it or a speechwriter wrote it, but that just weighed it down a little bit for me. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. Next up is AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman from New York. She says, the American people are once again dragged into a war they did not want by a president who does not care about the long-term consequences of his actions. The war is unlawful, it is unnecessary, and it will be catastrophic. Just this week, Iran and the United States were negotiating key measures that could have staved off this war. The president walked away from these discussions and chose war instead. President Trump flippantly acknowledged the possibility of American casualties, stating that often happens in war. Mr. President, this was not an inevitability. This is a deliberate choice of aggression when diplomacy and security were within reach. Stop lying to the American people. Violence begets violence. We learned this lesson in Iraq. We learned this lesson in Afghanistan. And we are about to learn it again in Iran. Bombs have yet to create enduring democracies in the region, and this will be no different. In moments of war, our Constitution is unambiguous. Congress authorizes war. The President does not. I will do my part to uphold the Constitution by voting yes on Representatives Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey's War Powers Resolution. Every member of Congress must join us in rejecting this aimless war. There's not too much to say other than I think this is pretty perfect as a response. It's clear and thorough. It reflects on history. It calls out the negotiations that were in progress the last few weeks. And while the statement itself is the sort of statement that I look for in leaders, she also called her fellow congresspeople to take direct action by voting for the War Powers Resolution. And on top of this, she reposted a statement calling out other Democrats directly, saying, Democrats need to stop hiding behind the legal concerns or just asking for briefings. This is wrong, it is deadly, it is being run and managed by a political leadership that is not capable. It is without justification. The president is unpopular and lying and has said we are at war. Her willingness to call out fellow Democrats shows an aversion to tribalism and, in my opinion, makes her statement stand out even more. And on the complete flip side, let's look at the Democratic governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, who is also probably running for president in 2028. And he says, the American people were promised by the president that he would avoid foreign conflicts. Generations of Americans are still dealing with long-term impacts of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. The president could have made his case at the State of the Union, but instead played political games. He owes Congress and the American people a full explanation, as these actions put American troops at significant risk. I don't know what sort of weak milquetoast response this is, but this isn't leadership. I understand that Andy Beshear is supposed to be the pragmatic Democratic governor in a Republican state who reaches across the aisle and likes having discussions despite political backgrounds, but if this is really how he approaches such a big foreign policy decision, where he's essentially saying, you got some explaining to do, and he seems more upset that Trump didn't use his State of the Union to explain himself rather than actually being upset over the fact that we entered another regime change war. That just comes out as weak nothingness. And if he prioritizes just the communication process over actual stances and views on foreign policy, then maybe he should be more of a marriage counselor than a president. But I don't think this is what leadership looks like. And I don't know if I guess it's a little better than Gavin because he didn't parrot propaganda, but it's still pretty bad. And speaking of milquetoast statements, we got the former Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who says the president has launched our nation and great military into a war of choice, risking American lives and resources, ignoring American law, and endangering our allies and partners. It does nothing to help with the urgent problems here at home that Americans face every day. The nation learned the hard way that an unnecessary war, with no plan for what comes next, can lead to years of chaos and put America in still greater danger. In traditional Pete fashion, this is just such an average answer. It almost feels like half a statement. I thought there was more to it, but that's all he said. It's very reflective, quiet, a bit weak. It's only 3 sentences, and 1 sentence he writes in passive voice. And it's just such a generic academic statement. Not as bad as these guys, but also lacks the leadership qualities of these women up here. It also lacks the leadership of the mayor of New York, Zohran Mamdani. He posted this statement: "Today's military strikes on Iran, carried by the United States and Israel, mark a catastrophic escalation in an illegal war of aggression, bombing cities, killing civilians, opening a new theater of war. Americans do not want this. They do not want another war in pursuit of regime change. They want relief from the affordability crisis. They want peace. I am focused on making sure that every New Yorker is safe. I have been in contact with our police commissioner and emergency management officials. We are taking proactive steps, including increasing coordination across agencies and enhancing patrols of sensitive locations out of an abundance of caution. Additionally, I want to speak directly to the Iranians of New York. You are part of the fabric of this city. You are our neighbors, small business owners, students, artists, workers, and community leaders. You will be safe here." Compare that statement to the passive statements from people like Pete Buttigieg, and you kind of see why Zohran is seen as probably the leader of the Democratic Party right now, which is why I also put him at the top of S tier. He's one of the few politicians that mention this is a war by the United States and Israel. You'll see later some statements that seem to intentionally provide cover for Israel, but the fact he's willing to say who exactly is leading this war, the United States and Israel, is honest and courageous and treats his audiences like adults. As I mentioned, Zohran can't run for president. He was born in Uganda, but despite not being able to run for that office, he's willing to show immense leadership qualities and make statements like this on foreign policy, which makes it extra disappointing when politicians who can run for president and do want to get promoted to the highest leadership position in the entire world choose to remain silent on this issue and not even put forth a statement. Now, some of these names might put forward a statement, like Governor of Maryland, Wes Moore. He has yet to put forward a statement. Entrepreneur, billionaire Mark Cuban, who some people think will run for president, hasn't put forward a statement. Tulsi Gabbard, who's now a Republican and the director of national intelligence, her rise to fame during the 2016 presidential election when she ran as a Democrat was opposing regime change wars, specifically war with Iran. But now, not only has she remained silent on the issue since the war began, she's also serving in a position of leadership within the administration that is conducting this war. Governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, has not made a statement, along with Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff. And getting ahead of myself, but Stephen A. Smith, the sports commentator, I don't think he's going to run, but a lot of people think he's going to run for president. Obviously, he hasn't made any sort of statement on this war. Someone who has released a statement, though, is Democratic Senator Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan. She states, "Americans woke up this morning to the news that the U.S. and Israel have started major military action against Iran. Unlike the U.S. strike on Iran back in June, this operation doesn't appear to be a one and done, so we're thinking about the safety of our service members and their families. Likewise, many Michiganders have family in the Middle East who are at high risk now that Iran is striking a number of countries. We pray for their safety as well. As a former CIA officer who served 3 tours in Iraq, I have no love lost for the Iranian government. They're a state sponsor of terror responsible for the deaths of Americans. I saw it up close in Iraq and elsewhere. But issues of war and peace should be treated with the utmost competence. And President Trump hasn't made his case to the American people. He hasn't laid out the goals or the imminent threat posed by Iran that justifies risking a wider regional war. And he hasn't followed the Constitution and brought this issue before Congress before committing our nation to war. Most elected leaders, including President Trump himself, have condemned the rush to war without clear goals in the past. He owes the American people the same thing he was demanding of previous presidents, if he's going to put lives at risk. And Congress should come back to Washington to debate these issues. Good Lord, not only does she avoid calling this war a war, despite even Republicans being willing to call it a war, but again, she seems hung up on the procedural process, not the fact that the American empire should stop waging counterproductive regime change wars around the world. Bragging about her history in the CIA as well when we're talking about regime change wars and collapse is, I'm almost tempted to put her in the F column, but I'll just put her in the low D since she is kind of critical, I guess. Sort of like Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. He says, America must be strong and smart. Today's actions were launched by a president who has rarely proven to be either. Let me be clear. The Iranian regime is one of the most dangerous, destabilizing forces in the Middle East. It has American blood on its hands. It has armed and supported terrorist proxies who have killed tens of thousands. It has brutalized its own people, killing thousands in recent weeks, simply for demanding basic human rights and a future free of oppression. Iran remains the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, and a nuclear-armed Iran would pose an intolerable threat to the United States, to our allies, and to global security. That outcome must never be allowed. But none of these facts suspend our Constitution or confer upon any president the authority to unilaterally wage war. The Constitution is unambiguous. Congress alone has the power to declare war and to authorize the use of military force. Today, Americans are feeling less safe because President Trump launched massive and ongoing military strikes on Iran without congressional authorization, without meaningful consultation, without lawmakers, and without presenting a credible legal justification or coherent strategy. He has taken our nation into a major military confrontation with the stated intent of regime change, and in doing so has put our troops, our diplomats, and our regional partners at grave risk. I don't think I need an explanation for right there. But of course, there are some Democrats who are pounding the war drums as well, including John Fetterman, senator from Pennsylvania, who says, Operation Epic Fury. President Trump has been willing to do what's right and necessary to produce real peace in the region. God bless the United States, our great military, and Israel. Since I've talked a lot about what makes a good and bad statement, in my opinion, I could speed through these a little quicker. Going to Governor of Illinois, J.D. Pritzker, who says, Donald Trump is once again sidestepping the Constitution and once again failing to explain why he's taking us into another war. Americans ask for affordable housing and healthcare, not another potentially endless conflict. God bless our troops. I'm going to put it right there. Again, focus just on a procedural critique mainly. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, says, In our democracy, the American people, through our elected representatives, decide when our nation goes to war. The framers of the U.S. Constitution, having just fought a war to win our nation's independence, recognized the grave consequences of going to war and vested that power in our representatives in Congress. Yet today, President Trump has acted unilaterally, without congressional approval and outside of the guardrails set up by our founders in Philadelphia nearly 250 years ago. In going to war with Iran, the president has not adequately explained why this war is urgent now, what this military campaign may look like, or what the strategic objective is. Until a few days ago, he was seeking a deal to dismantle Iran's nuclear program that the president himself claimed just a few months ago was completely destroyed. But today he declared that this is a war for regime change, something he said he would not pursue. Make no mistake, the Iranian regime represses its own people and is the leading state sponsor of terrorism around the world. They must never be allowed to possess nuclear weapons. The regime and its proxies have killed American service members and innocent civilians, wreaked havoc across the globe, and pose a direct threat to global peace and stability. In recent weeks, tens of thousands of brave Iranians have died standing up for their freedoms against a cruel regime. The people of Iran deserve a government that gives voice to these hopes, respects their rights, and pursues their interests peacefully, not through violence or intimidation. President Trump and his administration have not demonstrated to the American people that we have a clear plan with this mission, and by taking unilateral action without a broad coalition of international powers, he is putting our brave service members at greater risk and undermining our national security interests. Lori and I are praying for the women and men of the United States Armed Forces who are deployed in the region and around the world. They are the best of us. We have complete faith in their skills and professionalism, and they make up the most powerful military on earth. May God protect our troops. Obviously goes right into our D column. I think it's even worse than Newsom's. Let's change the pace a little bit. Janet Mills is running for Senate in Maine. She's not going to run for president in 2028. highly unlikely. She's currently the governor of Maine, but she's in her late 70s, so she would be in her 80s in 2028. But she currently is in a Democratic primary against Graham Plattner in Maine for the Democratic nomination. So I thought it was important to highlight both of their statements and see how they differ if anyone watching is in Maine and is curious to know how they responded to this regime change war. Janet Mills says, Trump's unilateral military action against Iran is recklessly pushing the United States into a dangerous conflict in the Middle East, putting the men and women of our military into harm's way and ignoring the constitutional imperative to consult Congress. This is yet another abuse of power from a president who constantly disregards the rule of law. The American people have had enough of forever wars that put the lives of our servicemen and civilians in danger, that do not protect the American people, that hurt our alliances and escalate global tensions. Congress needs to reassert its constitutional authority. Susan Collins should be using the power she claims to have to conduct oversight, demand answers, and stand up to the clear abuses of the president. It's a fine statement. It's clearly held back a little by campaign positioning. I also don't love that she said, again, it's a unilateral military action against Iran, potentially providing cover for Israel, unless she means unilateral in the US. But decent enough, so I'm putting it in C, probably a little bit above Buttigieg. And we can see how that compares to her main competitor, Graham Plattner in Maine, who is an oyster farmer, but is currently doing better than her in most recent polls, where he has since posted many videos condemning this war, including this strong statement.
Once again, in the space of less than 2 months, we awake to find that Donald Trump has illegally and unconstitutionally used military force against another country. Today, he has started major combat operations against the nation of Iran. He is doing this because he is flailing politically. He ran on ending foreign intervention like this, but because he sees his political future at risk, he is willing to send young American men and women into harm's way, and he is willing to bring an immense amount of violence upon the civilian population of Iran. This behavior makes us a pariah on the international stage. But we have to remember that this behavior is because we have acted like this in the past. I fought in wars just like this one. We cannot continue to have a foreign policy built around just dropping bombs on people when it benefits those in power here at home or benefits corporate interests abroad. This is not how the United States military should be utilized. Sadly, in the coming weeks, we are likely going to see more horror and more failure. This kind of behavior needs to end. None of us, no American, certainly no one in the Democratic Party, should support this kind of operation. This is the kind of foreign policy we need to end, not continue to support. I'm standing across the street from a war memorial here in northern Maine. It reminds me of the human toll of war, something that I have seen with my own eyes. We cannot continue to act in this way. This must end.
He's also tweeted a lot of other bold and pretty direct statements saying, young American men and women will die because Donald Trump is flailing politically. Let that sink in. I know the cost of war. I've watched friends die in war. This must end. If there ever was a time to use your power, it's now, Senator Susan Collins. He also called out Democratic Senator John Fetterman, who we talked about before, saying, a man who has never seen war and never will, cheering this on from a comfortable perch in Washington. Every senator who fails to stop this war should lose their seat, starting with Susan Collins and John Fetterman. Graham Plattner doesn't hold back, and that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people in Maine like him, and why he is outpolling the current sitting governor of Maine. He's definitely a guy rough around the edges. He's had a lot of scandals, but people see him as real and direct and honest, which is reflected in these statements that clearly condemn regime change war and make it personal. Recently, he even responded to fellow Senator Susan Collins saying, I can assure you your prayers didn't save my friends from dying in the last war you supported. In many ways, he's the stark opposite of the people calling for clean conversations and procedure and worrying about how this war was enacted rather than the fact that it was enacted. And with something as important and potentially catastrophic as a regime change war with Iran, I consider these sort of statements and clarity and personalizing of the costs of this war to be extremely impactful and a clear sign of leadership. But let's go ahead and take a look at the Texas Democratic primary, where Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas is running against State Assemblyman James Tallarico. In her statement, Jasmine Crockett said, "The self-proclaimed president of peace is once again starting illegal wars without congressional authorization. This is not what the American people asked for. Time and time again, Trump has proven that he is not interested in or capable of putting America first. Our soldiers will have to put their lives on the line to defend his reckless decisions. Congress must pass a war powers resolution to rein in this dangerous overreach before more damage is done." This is a solid statement. It's a little Trump-focused rather than the dangers of regime change war in general, and that's kind of Crockett's brand, as she likes being on the attack against Trump. And overall, I think it's a little bit better than the very weak statements from these two. Probably not as good as Harris's, so I would put her at a high C. And her opponent in the Democratic primary, James Tallarico, said the following: "No more forever wars." And he's yet to post anything else on the issue, which to me is kind of disappointing. I honestly thought throughout this primary that his foreign policy positions and his willingness to condemn what's happening in Gaza made him a stronger candidate on foreign policy than Jasmine Crockett. But when you compare these two statements, his is obviously lacking. At least he wasn't parroting propaganda or making the issue about procedure, but still disappointed. Next, we have Mark Kelly, who is the senator from Arizona and former astronaut, and he says, "People who have never served are often the quickest to start dropping bombs without a plan for what's next. The American people have seen this play out before, and they're tired of it. Trump is sending our service members into harm's way without a clear explanation of an end goal. It wasn't long ago that thousands of American families lost sons and daughters for a war with no end in sight. Trump is risking that again with Iran, and he's doing it all without congressional approval. The Senate needs to come back to Washington to do its job." Again, a lot of procedure focused, but he did call out past regime change wars and hinted at least the fact that elites who have never served are the ones that usually choose to send people to war. So probably better than Pete. Next, we have Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, and he says, "Trump is lying to the American people as he launches an illegal regime change war against Iran. This is endangering American lives and has already resulted in mass civilian casualties. This is not making us safer and only damages the U.S. and our interests. The Senate must immediately vote on the war powers resolution to stop it." I actually think this is really solid. It's shorter than most of them, but it hits the major points that regime change wars in general put us in more danger, empathizes with the civilian casualties that have already occurred in Iran, calls for direct action from his fellow senators, and doesn't waste time condemning Iran or spreading some questionable propaganda or coming across as a political speech for his own ambition, which is why I think it is a very solid, concise statement against this war that I would put at a pretty good A. Going back to the Republican side, or technically Libertarian side, Rand Paul says, "As yet another preemptive war is begun in the Middle East, John Quincy Adams' words of wisdom still ring true. Wherever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will her heart, her benedictions, and her prayers be. Like most Americans, I have sympathy for the plight of the Iranian people and all subjugated people around the globe, from North Korea to Tibet. But as Adams wrote, America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own. The Constitution conferred the power to declare or initiate war to Congress for a reason, to make war less likely. Madison wrote that the executive branch is the branch most prone to war. Therefore, the Constitution, with studied care, delegated the war power to the legislator. As with all war, my first and purest instinct is wish American soldiers safety and success in their mission. But my oath of office is to the Constitution, so with studied care, I must oppose another presidential war." This is all very Rand Paul, and while the quotes from Founding Fathers are an interesting read, and it is a little bit more difficult for someone that caucuses with Republican to take a stand against a Republican president, the statement is still pretty tame and weak, and it comes across that he's more worried that his fellow senators will be mad at him than he is worried about regime change war in Iran. So extra points for breaking with his team, I guess, but I'm just going to plop him there. Next, we have the senator from Arizona, Ruben Gallego, who actually has a video that is his main statement, and I was pretty impressed by it.
Well, I'm 46, and I've now seen my third war in the Middle East. And again, we find ourselves in the same situation that I saw myself, almost 21 years ago in Iraq, and even more so for other men and women. We're going to send a bunch of working class kids to go die, for a bunch of rich countries, a bunch of rich men here. And it's not a good feeling. Congress needs to get back into session. We need to exert control. We need to stop this war. We need to hear from the president why we actually should be even going to war in the first place. I don't want to see what happened in the past. I don't want to see friends die I want other people to see friends dying like I did. And, this is just ridiculous. We should not be going to war. There's no reason why we couldn't have worked this out. There's no reason why we should be going to war for other countries, whether it's the Gulf Coast countries or Israel. This is not our fight. And we need to stop what we're doing right now.
Like I said, I was kind of surprised by this video. I think it was impressive specifically for him to call out Israel by name. And he has since made multiple posts on his accounts on the issue. So I'm overall very satisfied and putting him right here. Next, we have Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock. And he says, Americans have long been weary of forever wars in the Middle East and the painful lessons that should have already been learned. The Trump administration's dramatic and deadly escalation in Iran risks yet another sad chapter of decades-long engagements. Given the lack of a clear plan, it risks increased instability in the region while endangering American troops and harming America's national security. A wider regional conflict could not make us safer. It would increase instability and uncertainty at a moment when our focus should be on pressing problems we face at home. Let's be clear, the Iranian regime is brutal and destabilizing. It cannot be allowed to obtain nuclear weapons. But the president has not explained why diplomatic talks that were underway this week are no longer viable and diplomacy no longer available. Instead, he has said in word and deed that this is war, a power that the Constitution reserves for Congress alone. The United States of America is a democracy and no president has the right to declare war or to drag the nation into war. Congress should return to session immediately to debate the use of force, as is our solemn duty. The American people deserve answers and a voice through their elected representatives. God bless their troops as they keep their oath. We, the people's elected representatives, must keep ours. I pray for peace. This is a pretty good statement. It kind of wanders off in different directions, including the procedural issue, as well as continuing to spread fears that Iran could get a nuclear weapon, and kind of making excuses for military actions while condemning it. But it's good that he called out that this is the same lesson we should have learned long ago. And I think it's pretty solid. Not as good as Harris's, but right there. Almost done. We got Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is the former congresswoman from Georgia. She is Republican, was very MAGA, far right. Her statement is really long. It goes all over the place. You can read it on Twitter. She talks a lot about COVID and vaccines. But I'm just going to focus on the stuff involving Iran. We said no more foreign wars, no more regime change. We said it on rally stage after rally stage, speech after speech. Trump, Vance, basically the entire admin campaigned on it and promised to put America first and make America great again. My generation has been let down, abused, and used by our government our entire adult lives, and our children's generation is literally being abandoned. Thousands and thousands of Americans from my generation have been killed and injured in never-ending pointless foreign wars, and we said no more. But we are freeing the Iranian people. Please, there are 93 million people in Iran. Let them liberate themselves. But Iran is on the verge of having nuclear weapons. Yeah, sure. We have been spoon-fed that line for decades, and Trump told us that all his bombing this last summer completely wiped it all out. It's always a lie, and it's always America last. But it feels like the worst betrayal this time because it comes from the very man in the admin who we all believed was different and said no more. We thought the victory won in 2024 would be finally the time to put America first, and we thought that meant the common American man and woman and their children, not the elites. America has suffered and they don't even care. Zero accountability for anyone from the MAGA America First administration as they run off to start wars and the Board of Peace at the same time, create the crisis and the solution simultaneously, and then build condos to profit, MAGA. For years, we demanded the release of Epstein files, demanded transparency and justice for thousands of victims, women and children, by the richest, most powerful men in the world, and we had to fight Trump himself to do it, even after we all campaigned on it. and not a single person has been arrested and likely won't be. No accountability, no justice. Instead, we get a war with Iran on behalf of Israel that will succeed in regime in Iran. Another foreign war for foreign people for foreign regime change. For what? Does it lower the inflation that our government caused by both Democrats and Republicans with their decades of corrupt government spending that has enslaved us all in nearly $40 trillion in debt and reduced the value of our dollar to nothing? No. War with Iran does not lower inflation and does not make living affordable. Does the war with Iran fix our healthcare system and make health insurance affordable for Americans? No. War with Iran does not do that, and the MAGA admin and Republicans aren't even working on it in any serious way at all. Does war with Iran stop AI from replacing your job? Nope. Does war with Iran help you be able to afford to buy a home? No. But you'll see the TikTok videos of nice penthouses when Gazas are built. Does war with Iran help the mental health crisis in America or help the drug addiction pandemic in America? No. Does war with Iran do anything to help American families stay together and survive? No, not at all. But within hours of war with Iran, it was reported approximately 40 innocent girls, school children in Iran were killed by bombs from Israel. And they don't care. They kill thousands of innocent children in Gaza, and apparently our pro-peace administration doesn't care either. And since they won't solve America's problems, clearly they don't care about our kids either. Now America is going to be force-fed and gaslighted all the noble reasons the American peace president and pro-peace administration had to go to war once again this year, after being in power for only a year. Head spinning, but MAGA. Okay, I'm losing my voice after reading all that. If you read the full statement, you see she veers off in many different directions, which I think weakens it as a statement in general, but ignoring all of MTG's unique qualities and questionable stances, I'll probably put her right in here. Like I said, the full rantiness might have undercut what she was actually trying to say, and ending with "but MAGA" kind of confuses it a bit too, but still very thorough and willing to say the thing. And last, I'm just gonna put Representative Ro Khanna from California up at number 1 here. I wouldn't say he has like an official statement like most of these people. He has many statements that he's been saying today and for the past several weeks since murmurings began about reigniting a regime change war with Iran. And he's been working tirelessly, putting out statements and encouraging members of Congress to vote on the War Powers Resolution with Thomas Massie that would in theory limit the executive from certain war powers. And he's also calling members of Congress to be on record where they stand. And all that together is just showing him and Thomas Massie, who's not here, as a true leader in this moment, as he was with the Epstein files as well. Hi again, it's me from the future. While editing this, we got some statements from Governor Wes Moore and Senator Jon Ossoff that I thought I'd include and update these rankings. I would feel bad leaving them in the bottom tier as they both have released statements within 24 hours of the war starting. So, Maryland Governor Wes Moore said, "I'm closely monitoring the ongoing military actions in Iran. International military actions have direct and profound impact on Maryland's family and communities. I served in Afghanistan, and I've seen who pays the price when Washington rushes into conflict. We owe the men and women executing on these orders a clear understanding of the mission. When we ask them to risk their lives, we need to be clear there is no other option. For decades, the Iranian regime has been an agent of terror in the region, and we have been able to reach bipartisan consensus to restrict nuclear capabilities and promote stability in the region. We can stand with Iranian people who support the cause of democracy and freedom without risking another conflict that sends another generation of American troops into combat. I am in constant communication with public safety officials, senior military advisors, and local and federal partners to ensure we are taking every measure necessary to protect our state. At Dawnfly, the Moore and I are praying for peace, and we thank our brave service members who stand watch in harm's way." This is an okay statement. It's pretty narrowly focused on the experience the soldiers are going through and softly condemns rushing into conflict. It sort of focuses a little bit more on making sure the orders are clear to the military rather than whether or not he as a leader feels this is a just use of the American military, which is why I put it right around Pete's statement. And then we have Senator Jon Ossoff, who posted his statement on his website around 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time, where he said, 8 months ago, Donald Trump lied to the country when he claimed U.S. airstrikes had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Now Trump says he's taken America to war for regime change in Iran. Trump has launched this regime change war and put American forces at risk without presenting evidence of an imminent threat, without clear objectives, without having exhausted diplomacy, without a plan for the aftermath, and without the consent of Congress. I oppose yet another regime change war of choice in the Middle East. Congress must convene immediately and pass a war powers resolution to assert our constitutional authority over war and peace. The president has presented no evidence that Iran or its nuclear program, which he falsely claimed had been obliterated, pose an imminent threat to the United States, or that diplomacy was exhausted. Iran's support for terrorism and Iranian enrichment have long destabilized the region, but sending American forces into harm's way should only be the last resort. I pray for the safety of U.S. forces who have been ordered into battle and commend their extraordinary professionalism. So compare these two statements. I think John Ossoff's is a little stronger because he actually says his opinion on the regime change war and that he opposes it and calls for Congress members to support the war powers resolution. That direct call for action is a little bit more than Harris did. He seems to want to cover his ground in different sides of the conflict in a way that makes it feel a little bit less focused than Van Hollen's. So I'm just going to put it a little bit below Van Hollen's. And there you have it. And you know what? Because I learned my lesson, I'm just going to add a row of nothing yet, in case any of these people actually do end up making a statement, though I think her actions spoke louder than words. Okay, bye.